You.
Okay, Rich Edson, thank you very much.
Well, with the next high-stakes budget meeting set for Sunday at the White House, what's the reaction from lawmakers to today's negotiations?
For more, we bring in Senator Rob Portman, Republican of Ohio and member of the Senate Budget Committee. It was interesting, Senator, to see, first of all, welcome to the program, but interesting to see certainly that you had Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and some revelations that there have been meetings other than the ones that were made public. Does this mean that we will see a deal in the next couple of days, or at least before the August 2nd deadline?
I think the prospects of it have improved. Last week, I was on Fox talking about the fact that the president seemed to have taken a more political stance, but this week it seems like both parties are trying to get to yes. No one wants to have a default. Everybody wants to be sure that we go into this post-debt limit period with some kind of an agreement. But the president also said today that, the parties are still far apart. If you look at the problem, it's clearly spending, and the president's got to acknowledge that. Seems like he has. Apparently he made some comments about the need for us to reform the entitlement programs, which is the long-term problem. So I think there's a prospect now to find some consensus, as long as the focus is on spending.
What about consensus among Republicans? Sometimes you see what appears to be a split between Senate Republicans and House Republicans, John Boehner, Senator McConnell, the newbies, the Tea Party folks. I mean, are Republicans, are they all speaking from the same book?
Well, look, there's a lot of independent thinking on the Republican side, as there should be, same as on the Democrat side, and everybody agrees. But I think Republicans agree as a group on two things. One, we've got to balance the budget over time, and that's something where all 47 Republican senators have signed on, and I think all Republicans in the House.
But the big split between Republicans are those who focus on balancing the budget and those who focus on building jobs and growth. They say that balancing the budget has to come second to building jobs. What do you say?
Well, that's the second thing I was going to say. I think there's a consensus second among Republicans about the need for pro-growth policies. So when you look at this problem, it's twofold. One, we've got to restrain the spending. Clearly, the spending is what's gotten out of control. It's much higher than historical levels. Second, in order to deal with this deep fiscal hole we're in, the record deficits, the record debt, we've got to both restrain the spending and grow the government. And until we come up with policies like sensible tax reform that encourages investment, innovation, hard work, as you all talk about on your program, we're not going to be able to grow the economy. So I hope these budget negotiations will end up with some restraint on spending. It has to be done. The president has acknowledged that. These programs are simply unsustainable in their current form. But second, put in place some things that will actually get this economy moving again, to get the consumer confidence up, to get private investment back, to get jobs growing. That will in turn create revenue that we need. But it should be done through growing the economy, not taxing the economy.
All right. Well, there is quite a bit of talk, Senator, about cutting some of the tax deductions, and certainly things like tax breaks for people who are buying, and the president has mentioned this many times, things like private jets, or of course tax breaks for things like yachts. There's a whole host of issues that are within the tax code that people say, wait a minute, if you're going to cut defense spending and cut certain things that our troops would arguably love to have too, shouldn't it be balanced with those types of elimination of certain deductions?
Well, clearly it should all be on the table, but let me just be clear. The things the president has identified, as you know, are relatively small contributors. In other words, it's a tiny bit of revenue when you're talking about the corporate jets, as he loves to talk about.
You know, every time something's brought up, Senator, people say, oh, that's a rounding error. You know, we've got to start somewhere. We can't seem to wrap our arms around the big stuff.
We do have to start somewhere, and I, for one, and most Republicans are adamant that we need to reform the tax code by getting rid of a lot of these preferences and lowering the rates. Economists across the board, right and left, believe that will encourage economic growth, as I said earlier, encourage savings and investment and work. But my only point is the president hasn't talked about the big picture issues, which is, really how to deal with the long-term debt problem, which is on the entitlement side. So yes, we should reform the tax code. We should clean out a lot of this underbrush, get rid of a lot of these preferences, the exclusions and the credits and the deductions, and lower the rate, particularly on the corporate side, where, as you've heard constantly, our corporate rate is not competitive with the rest of the world, therefore driving jobs offshore. And that needs to be part of this package. I do think that there's a possibility of that now. I hear more talk about it. I have just come out of a meeting recently where some of the Republican negotiators, the leadership were at the meeting, and I think tax reform is one